I'm not going to use that. Okay. Good afternoon. It's really a delight to be here. I'm so excited to learn that you're going to have a year-long series of discussions about this. I think the more that we talk about these issues, the more they become tangible in our own lives, the more we begin to see potential ways that we might engage with the question of sustainability more effectively. We take some small changes or some direct changes in our own lives, and I think that's really good. Let me tell you about what I think is the greatest challenge that we face in the 21st century. And that the greatest challenge that I think we face in the 21st century is balancing two kind of big trends. On the one hand, there's this trend that promises more robust economies, more people gaining higher levels of well-being, more economic growth and development across the entire world as the population grows. More people doing better on the one hand. And on the other hand, that same trend threatens the ecosystems upon which all of our lives depend. Balancing or coming to grips with those two trends, with the economic growth and development and increased well-being of billions of people on the one hand, and the fragile capacity of our ecosystems to deliver this kind of services that produce clean air and clean water and keep thriving biodiversity on the planet is really the challenge that we face. Now, if the University of Illinois was a model citizen and it was really actively engaged in that great challenge, what would it do? How would it behave? How would our campus look? How would our educational programs look? Well, I hope to answer that question today and to give you some sense that we're at least leaning a little bit in the direction, maybe even having taken a step or two in the direction of trying to answer that. I'm going to talk a little bit, to begin with, about the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment that came out a little less than 2 years ago, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's reports, the 3 reports that came out this year in 2007. I'm going to explore some ideas about what we mean by environmental sustainability, and I hope that we'll just kind of go back and forth together to understand that. I'll give you some of the sense of the size and scale of the campus and the challenge that we actually face here because of our density and the amount of energy that we use and whatnot, and the people that we're trying to serve. And then I'm going to describe some specific actions that we've taken and the clear and concrete actions that we've taken, and then maybe give a vision of where I think we might be or like to be in a few years. So let me begin with the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report. Are you familiar with it? Anybody familiar with it? No. Okay. Can you know anything about it? You want to say anything about it?
Well, it's a United Nations effort to assess the environmental status of most of the world.
Yeah, it's a big UN effort. Hundreds of scientists participated, not unlike the IPCC, to assess the health and functioning of a whole host of ecosystems around the world. And it was a multi-year effort, and the conclusions were published in 2005. Here are some of the conclusions from the report. First of all, nearly 2/3, 66%, of the services provided by nature to humankind are found to be in decline worldwide. So ecosystem services that we depend on, about 2/3 of them, the trend line is down. They're in decline. What do we mean by ecosystem services? What's an ecosystem service? Can anybody shout one out? Food, right. The provision of food. Ecosystems provide food. What else?
Water.
Yeah, oxygen, right. Clean water, right. What else?
Minerals.
Yeah, minerals, right. The nutrient cycling, right? Wildlife and biodiversity, right? So I just made a little quick list of them here. Clean water, air purification, climate regulation, food production, disease regulation, flood regulation, erosion control, We could make a very long list. And as you see, when we make this list and we think about these things, these are not insignificant or trivial things, are they? And what the report, kind of the global report of the climate in 2005 said, 2/3 of these systems are in decline. The report goes on to state, and I'll quote here, human activity is putting such a strain on the natural functions of the Earth that the ability of the planet's ecosystems to sustain future generations can no longer be taken for granted. So we can't take for granted that these ecosystem services will continue to sustain human life at least at the level that we've got on Earth right now. That's where we're at today. That sounds pretty threatening, doesn't it? Let's turn our attention to the IPCC report. IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's been going since when? Anybody know? When was the first IPCC committee put together? It was in the 80s, and I think in the 88 was the first report that came out. So it was probably 2 or 3 years prior to that, in the mid-80s when they first came together. Well, in the report that was released on February 1st of this year, they made a kind of a startling statement. They said that the 1,300 scientists that put this together, climate scientists, experts from around the world, they said that they can say with 90% certainty that the warming that we've been experiencing on the Earth since the 1950s is largely due or mostly due to the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases that we've been putting into the atmosphere. So they're 90% certain that the warming that we've seen is because of the activities that we've been engaged in that put gases from fossil fuels into the atmosphere. The report concluded with high confidence that human-caused climate change was already affecting regional conditions from the poles to the tropics, and that hundreds of millions of people could be harmed by coastal flooding, dwindling water supplies, and shifting weather patterns within a few decades. The changes that they're also talking about, and David, I thought about you when I was preparing this, the changes that they're also talking about in terms of increased temperature, but also changes to habitats, will have enormous impacts on biodiversity. And some people say, I think right now it seems like there's two camps of people that say the biggest threat to sustainability, one group says that it's climate change and the impacts of climate change. Another group says, well, something's going to happen faster than climate change, and that is the incredible loss of biodiversity, and that's going to have an enormous impact on our capacity to sustain life on Earth. I don't know. What do you think, David? Do you think one is more important than the other?
Between habitat and climate?
Yeah, between biodiversity loss and climate.
I would say habitat destruction still beats climate change.
So habitat destruction is going to be dependent a little bit on climate change. Well, a considerable amount on climate change. Okay, so the climate change may impact habitats, and we're already seeing that, especially there's all kinds of predictions about species that live in habitats that might change rapidly. The biggest one that's kind of the poster child for that is what? Yeah, it's the polar bears. Exactly right. Right. You see them on magazines a lot now, and the sense is that polar bears, we may lose more than half of the polar bears in the next 20 years or so, and they're wondering if they may be extinct by 2050. So the impacts on sustainability from climate and from ecosystem changes are really dramatic. Now let's add on to that some of the projections that the demographers are making for us. How many people are they expecting to be on Earth in 25 years? Anybody know the range?
About 9 billion.
Yeah, the range is between 9 and 10.5 billion is what they give these ranges. Between 9 and 10.5 billion. So we have a little more than 6.5 billion people on Earth right now. So we're going to increase that by 50 to 60%. So And there's another trend going on as well, right? And we can see that trend when we look at a number of developing countries, particularly China and parts of Africa. What's happening there? Population is growing, but what else is happening that puts strain on ecosystems? Yeah, industrialization, quality of life, economic development is growing rapidly. China is developing at a pace right now that's stunning, that's phenomenal. And it's doing so by extracting resources not only from China, but from around the world and transporting those resources to China. Well, as we move towards 9 billion or 9.5 billion or 10 billion people, the strain on ecosystems is going to increase significantly more than when the recent IPCC report was written or the Millennium Ecosystem report was written. And I think this should be a large bell or a gong that we're hitting that says, whoa, there's some real issues, some real challenges that we face here. Now, to protect ecosystems, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report comes out with a number of recommendations. I'm just going to read the categories to you because I found them kind of amusing. Number of recommendations related to the integration of ecosystem management. Elimination of perverse subsidies. Well, that makes sense, right? I mean, you know that we spend about $1 billion a year to subsidize the production of sugarcane in Florida, even though sugarcane probably doesn't belong in Florida at all. Get rid of that. We should restore damaged ecosystems. That makes a lot of sense. We should use economic instruments and market-based approaches to try and protect the ecosystems. That's all well and good. I think those are wonderful ideas. But the question, it kind of begs the question, what are we doing here and now? What are we doing on our campus today in 2007 to try and address these major issues? Let me tell you what our vision is. Our vision, and this is the vision of the Environmental Council and a number of units on campus. It's not yet got the official university seal on it, but we're working very hard on this. And our vision is to conceive of the campus, the physical campus, and all the activities that we engage in as a living, learning laboratory for environmental sustainability, so that the design of the campus, the transportation plan, the way we deal with rainwater on campus, the way we procure and use energy, the way we buy materials and supplies, where we get our food, what we do with our waste. All of these are issues that we can explore as a way of engaging with and promoting new knowledge and technologies related to sustainability. We can have classes that focus on these issues. We can have undergraduate senior theses that explore some of these issues. We can have master's and PhD theses that explore these issues. We can also invite the world in to see how we've done. So we can engage in engagement in a very different fashion. Instead of going out there and kind of making demonstrations, we can bring people in into campus. And really that suggests a change in our land grant mission, or our land grant, not in our mission, but in the way in which we deliver on that mission. You know, for so long, we went out there and we talked to the farmers, or we talked to the business people, and we figured out what their problems were. We came back to campus. We worked really hard on those problems, and then we sent the information back out and said, okay, here's the next pesticide used in the cornfields, and here's the next soybean variety that will resist this disease. Now we're suggesting that we do something a little differently. We say society is facing this enormous challenge. We need to figure out how we're going to evolve or how we're going to live 20 and 30 years from now. What's our economy going to be like? What are the technologies that sustain our well-being and at the same time protect the ecosystems? And instead of kind of going out there and figuring it out, we're going to do it here on our own campus. We're going to use our daily practices and our design, the design of our facilities and the way we procure things to actually explore those kinds of questions. And then we'll invite society in to see what worked and what didn't, where we succeeded, where we failed, what seems to be worth the expenditure, what doesn't, what are the various costs and benefits. So let me give you a little background on the challenge. Let's talk about sustainability first. Because I think many of us have a sense in our own minds about what we mean by sustainability, but in having had various discussions, mostly with administrators on campus, who tell me that, oh, I don't know what you mean by sustainability, or sustainability tries to mean everything. So let's have a little discussion about that. Do you guys have a concise sense of sustainability, or would you like to offer any ideas about sustainability? Yeah.
We've been trying to find a definition we can use over the Illinois State Water Survey, and we can't really get much beyond the one that the UN came up with.
The Brundtland Commission, yeah, right.
We've really, every time something comes across the internet or we go out, we've been looking for ways to define it. We haven't been successful.
Good, okay, yeah.
Excuse me. I think sustainability is a style of survival.
A style of survival. Okay. Anybody else?
Maintaining capital, interest and withdrawals, we want to maintain capital.
Yeah, right. So he said maintaining environmental capital over the long run. Yeah. Okay, so let me just kind of go through some. I just tried to do the same thing you've been doing. I've been tracking the evolution of the term, and the first kind of public discussion of this came from the Brundtland Commission, which is formerly known as the World Commission on Environment and Development in 1987. They published this definition, and they talked not about sustainability, but about sustainable development at the time. They said that sustainable development is that kind of development that meets the needs of the present generation, without comprising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So you meet your needs today without comprising the ability of future generations to meet. Compromise. I'm sorry. Thank you. Compromise the ability of future generations to meet their needs. This it kind of brings to mind the Iroquois Indian notion of making decisions with 7 generations in mind, doesn't it? So that idea has a long history and a good history, doesn't it? And about 8 years later, at the World Summit on Social Development, folks there further refined this idea. And they said sustainability is the framework of our efforts to achieve a higher quality of life for all people, in which economic development, social development, and environmental protection are interdependent and mutually reinforcing. So they're parsing it a little more. So it's not just environmental, but it's social and economic. In 2002, at the World Summit on Sustainable Development, they expanded the definition a little further by identifying 3 overarching objectives for sustainability. First, they said we need to eradicate poverty. Second, protect our natural resources. And third, we need to change unsustainable production and consumption patterns. So poverty, protection of natural resources, and then change our unsustainable consumption and production patterns. Last year, William Rees had a formulation that I kind of like a lot. He's a professor of community and regional planning at the University of British Columbia. Rees argues that the ultimate goal of sustainability should be to enable the entire human family to live with dignity and a reasonable degree of economic and social security within the ecological means of nature. So it's interesting how it's shifted over time, right? The original discussions were really focused on natural resources and protection of the natural environment. And now increasingly you're seeing the kind of social dimension and the human dimension take a larger role in these discussions, I think in part because of 2 issues. One issue is equity, in the sense that we need, it's good to have equitable distribution of resources both today and also into future generations. And secondly, because there's some patterns of consumption that are so out of sync with what's sustainable that we need to address those kinds of patterns. Rumi Shaman, does anybody know Rumi Shaman? One or two of you know Rumi. He got his PhD in natural resources here last year. And Rumi, in his dissertation, he came up with this definition of sustainability I like a lot. Sustainability is ensuring that critical social, economic, and ecological processes are maintained in a way so that both the short and long-term quality of life of human societies and health and diversity of natural ecosystems are not compromised. and that the scale of human activities is kept within the natural carrying capacity of the environment. So I like that definition because it moves back a little bit more towards a balance between the human and the ecological kinds of questions. When I kind of made an assessment of all these various definitions, I noticed that they were focused on a couple of important questions. How do we create a society that allows all present and future humans to be healthy, have their basic needs met, have fair and equitable access to the Earth's resources, and have a decent quality of life? And at the same time, how do we do all that and preserve the ecosystems upon which life depends? Well, maybe we define it more like a question by identifying those questions. So what we're proposing is that we use the Living Learning Laboratory idea on campus as a way of exploring these possibilities, so that what we do has to have an economic component, has to have a social component, and certainly has to have an ecological component associated with it. Now, let me give you a sense of the challenge. How many people are on campus, do you know? Between faculty, staff, and students? 45,000, 50,000, yeah. The figure I got from the last report from the President's office, about 49,000 people a day. 49,000 people on a daily basis on campus. We have 270 main buildings in the main campus area that cover 2.3 square miles and a whole lot more on the south campus. We have 22 undergraduate residence halls, so 22 housing units for 8,500 students. How many surface parking lots do you think we have?
5 or 6
It is a 5. Well, no, yeah. It's 123. We have 123 surface parking lots on campus, and we have 5 parking garages. We've got almost 10,000 rental spots that we rent to people, and 13,000 total when you include the meters. Now, the people over in parking tell us that we're currently 1,600 parking spots short of demand. And if we build out in the way that we plan to build out by 2010, we'll be 5,000 parking spots shy of demand. Now, that means parking right next to your building, not parking out in the assembly hall over here. We have 25 miles of bike paths. I like this number. We take 9 million bus trips per year on campus. 9 million rides per year on campus. We burn what seems to me like an enormous amount of energy. 400 million kilowatt hours of energy was burned in 2004. About half of that was generated at Abbott right over here, and then half of it we purchased. Half of what was purchased came from Clinton, and half came from other sources. So we put carbon dioxide in the air from all the energy that we purchase, that we burn on campus, from the coal and natural gas, and from the additional 1/4 of the energy that we purchase on the market. We don't put a whole lot of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases in from the energy that we purchase at Clinton. There's some other issues with Clinton. So when you do the budget on that, and this is from the numbers in 2004, which is the last year that we had information available thanks to Lita Bailey, we put about 1 billion pounds of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere on an annual basis from this campus. Now, at first glance, 1 billion pounds, that sounds like a lot. I mean, it is a lot, right? A billion of anything is a lot, right? But it's really not out of sync in any way from a community of 50,000 people that has transportation and industry and schools and housing. And it's not out of sync at all with University of Wisconsin or the University of Michigan or Michigan State or Purdue. I mean, we're kind of right in there. We're not an outlier in any way, which suggests to me that that's a real opportunity, right? In some ways, we're a microcosm of the society. And if we can figure out how to solve these problems here, that's a wonderful thing, because certainly they'll be generalizable to a larger and broader place. So it adds a sense of urgency to our work and a sense of importance, because if we can figure this out here, And we can figure out in multiple ways. We can figure out what doesn't work, and we can share that with the world. We'll really be making a significant progress, I think. So, let me stop this portion of my discussion and tell you exactly some of the concrete things that we're doing, because I think there's some exciting things going on. The first thing I want to tell you is that under the Chancellor's direction, last year a group of us got together and we were told to hammer out an energy policy for campus. And there's a dozen of us, I think, people whose kind of lefty-leaning, sustainability, goofy folks like me, and some people whose jobs it is to make sure that the facilities are functioning in a very effective, high-level way, whose jobs depend on the fact that they have to have laboratories that have refrigerators or freezers that keep the contents of those freezers constantly and continuously, at some ridiculously low temperature, right? Because they've got samples in there that are almost invaluable. So we had a group of folks who had very different kind of orientations towards energy use and the notion of energy conservation. And we hammered out a policy. And I brought a copy of it here. And this policy went through the process, fairly aggressive process of meeting sometimes a couple of times a week over the course of about a 12 or 13 week period, and we put this thing together. And I want to share with you the 3 goals that we have for energy on our campus now. And this has been the Chancellor burned some incense and sprinkled some holy water over this, or did whatever he has to do to make it official. He made it official. He disseminated it. So this is our campus policy now related to energy, and here are our 3 goals. Goal number 1, reduce energy consumption. Goal number 2, shift to renewable energy resources. Goal number 3, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'm so happy about this and delighted about it and proud of it that our institution has really taken that stand and said, here are the 3 goals that we've got, and then there's a whole 7 pages that describes the steps that we're going to take, the incremental steps that we're going to take to move in that direction. I understand that Chancellor Herman is about ready to sign the President's Climate Change, what's it called? The President's Climate Change, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly what it's called. It's a statement that talks about that in which the President or a Chancellor of a campus will pledge to reduce the carbon emissions of the campus by X amount over about a 30-year period. And we've been going back and forth with the Chancellor on this, and he's about ready to sign it. And it gave him some pause to think about this because we've been successful in an area that's going to have an enormous impact on this. Do you know what that is? You may have heard that we won this petascale computer project. Did you hear about that? It's going to be the fastest computer in the world for a few days until someone else builds the fastest computer in the world. When it's running at its kind of peak capacity, which they hope to have it running at its peak capacity a lot, it will use it'll be one building built over here by the Abbott Power Plant. It's going to be an 80,000 square foot building, a single computer. It will take a quarter of the energy that we use on campus right now, an additional quarter. And they expect that, the thing costs $200 million. So they expect to have it running at near full capacity, 24 hours a day, almost every day of the year. It's going to generate so much heat. First, it's going to require a fair amount of electricity just to run the machine, but most of the energy associated with it is going to be associated with how to keep it cool. It's going to cost an enormous amount of money. That we're going to pump cold water through it. So we got to cool the water and then pump the water through to try and keep the thing cool. So the good news is that the chancellor is willing to sign this president's pledge on carbon reduction, in spite of the fact that in a couple of years our energy use will go up by at least 25%. I think we're also making, so those are kind of big issues. Let's talk a little bit more about concrete, specific actions. One of the
On the other goals, are there actual targets as well? The alternate energy use and so forth? Are there numbers attached to that?
There's not numbers yet.
Okay.
Yeah. These are our goals right now. And not yet. But, well, the energy conservation and the greenhouse gas thing, those go hand in hand. And, you know, we're getting very aggressive with the with energy use on campus. And so one of the things that we're doing, and they started out in my building. I wonder if that was in any way. I'm not sure about this, but so they started out, and I'm in the National Soybean Research Lab over here by Pennsylvania and Dorner Drive, and they started out in our building, and they're doing a very intensive energy assessment of the building, and they figured out a number of things. You know, we've got fume hoods. You know what fume hoods are, right? If you've got a volatile chemical that you're working with in your laboratory, you open the drawer, you put the fume hood in, you close the drawer, it's a piece of glass, you can see right through, and the air is sucked through this, so there's a positive suction out, so that the chemical doesn't, the gases from the chemical don't seep back into your laboratory. Well, that's kind of once in and once out air. That means in the wintertime, you heat that air, it goes into the laboratory. When the fume hood is on, it gets sucked out through the fume hood, and it gets exhausted out of the building. In the summertime, you cool that air, you dehumidify that air, and it goes through that same process. It's once in and once out, which is the most expensive way to condition a building. Well, we've got quite a number of these in the soybean lab. We did a little survey of the use of them, and there's a bunch that don't ever get used, but they're on all the time. And then the ones that do get used, they're in use 3 hours a week. 3 hours a week. But the system is on 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. You know what it costs to run one fume hood per year? You're right. It's more than $5,000. It's almost $6,000 per year per fume hood to condition that air and have it go right out. So one of the things that we're doing is saying, hey, you know, maybe we could be smarter about this. We could figure out which fume hoods are in use, which are not, how often they're in use. If you need to store volatile chemicals in your laboratory, maybe we could have a common spot where that could get done, and we don't have to have, you know, many tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, certainly millions of dollars of energy use across campus every year is associated with these fume hoods. So we're being smarter about that. One of the things that we're doing is we're going to use more direct digital controls. We're going to be using smarter systems in our buildings to do things. And we're getting pushback on this, but we've said we're going to stop heating buildings at the normal heating temperature of 72 or whatever degrees it is in the wintertime after 11 o'clock at night. At 11 o'clock, we're going to shut it down. We're going to let it go down to 60 degrees. And we're not going to turn it back up until about 6:30 in the morning. So we're going to have a number of hours that we're going to really significantly reduce the heating load on the building, and it's not going to go back up again. That's going to save us an enormous amount of money in each of the buildings that we do this in, and it's going to be handled in some buildings it's going to be handled within the building, and some buildings it's going to be handled in kind of a central spot over here by Abbott. So we're making progress there in those ways. And, you know, some of that's going to be a little bit, some people are going to bite the bullet a little on that because, you know, some people need to be in the labs late at night, or a lot of younger people prefer to work late at night. So they're just going to have to bring some sweaters, I guess. Right? And we're going to do the same thing with air conditioning in the summertime. We're also making progress on reducing energy consumption in other ways. The College of Business building, the new College of Business building, have you seen that? It's gosh, I don't know, it looks like it's 75 or 80% complete, right? It's going to use 75% less energy per square foot than Lincoln Hall uses today, or than Davenport Hall, or some of the older buildings on campus. It's going to use 40% less energy than the building that I'm in, a relatively newer building. Because it's going to be a gold level LEED certified building, and it's going to be designed with energy conservation in mind, and they're going to do a great job of that. It's going to get 7% of its energy from photovoltaic cells on the roof. So 7% of the electricity use, we figure, is going to be just from direct sunlight. And we got a nice grant from the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation to help offset the cost of those solar panels. It's going to have a green roof. Part of it's going to have a green roof as well. We've built, I don't know if you heard of this recently, we built a straw bale barn out at Allerton. Has anybody seen that? Yeah. It's a lovely structure, isn't it? Brian Deal designed it, and super insulated with straw bales. It's going to cut energy. Energy is going to be, they're guessing right now by their measurements, they're using 50% less energy than a brand new typical barn. It's got, the heating is all through the floor, which is nice because we're more in contact with the floor. It's a very efficient way to heat. We're doing a number of energy audits on campus to try and figure out where the kind of big sinks are. We've done an energy audit at Krannert Center for the Performing Arts, at the Union. A bunch of students are getting involved in these kinds of efforts as well. As you know, one of the big efforts is we won a major grant to build 3 wind turbines. Those will be placed on the South Farms. There's been a long delay in that. Part of the delay was associated with the FAA. They were concerned about the wind turbines and the flight patterns coming into Willard Airport. But we've worked with them. We've gone through an entire review process. Now we've got a site that's been selected that's east of Race Street, so it's far enough away that they've approved of that. It's also in a nice little wind pattern there, so it's a very nice solution. It works. It's a solution that's very good for safety for the airplanes going into Willard, but it's also good because there's good wind patterns there as well. There'll be 1.65 megawatts each, and they'll generate about 3% of the electricity use that we have on campus. So it's not, it's 3%. It's not an enormous amount, but it's a step in the right direction, and it makes the world a little safer for the next kind of project that we'd like to take, and the project after that. I want to tell you about another program that we've got. It's called. It's a really exciting thing that we're doing in collaboration with Facilities and Services here on campus, and Jack Dempsey has been very generous in supporting this. We call it Build a Lasting University Environment. BLUE, Build a Lasting University Environment. Every year Jack Dempsey spends, $1 million or more bringing in consultants from New York City and Singapore. I don't know where he brings them in. And he has them help them figure out how to make this system better or improve that or redesign this or do that. So one day, he and I were having coffee, and I said, Jack, set aside a small portion of that money, would you? And instead of hiring these folks from New York, let's engage students. Let's get student and faculty teams together, and they'll work on whatever the problem is. And so we did that. The first thing he wanted done was they wanted a redesign of parking lot F23 by, Florida and Lincoln Avenue. There's a big, by the playfields there's an old parking lot. And they wanted some redesign with permeable pavement. Well, we sent a little RFP out on campus, and sure enough, we got several responses, and we gave the grant to a group from Civil and Environmental Engineering that had students from landscape architecture in it, and they got this nice little multidisciplinary team of students and faculty members, and they came up with a design. Not only is it a design that uses materials right now, but it comes up as it's got a research component built right in it, because they've got several different pavement patterns that they're going to use, and they're going to go out there and test it on a regular basis. So that's a project that's in the queue now. It's just a lovely example. The Rain Garden, you may have heard of Rain Garden. The Rain Garden was a project that, the question is, how do we deal with rain? See, on campus, and most places across the world, you hear about stormwater, right? We got to get rid of stormwater. And I'm on my own personal little campaign to get rid of the term stormwater, and to think about rainwater. Because as soon as you change the term from stormwater to rainwater, you start thinking about, well, rainwater is a resource, right? Rainwater is something we might want to reuse and find ways to not get rid of right away, but actually keep around. And maybe we could even have it be as an amenity. Well, does anybody know where the rain garden is? Over here by Allen Hall and near McKinley, off of Dorner Drive. Well, there's this enormous detention pond right there on Dorner Drive. It's kind of an example of the 20th century way that we dealt with water, stormwater. We collected as fast as possible off any surface, sidewalks or roads or grass surfaces, and we quickly get it as quickly as possible underground into a storm sewer, and then we shunt that storm sewer to some detention basin, so it empties out into that pipe, and there it goes. Well, the rain garden has a different philosophy. It says, hey, it's going to rain, and what we want to do is we want to detain that rain as close to the spot where it rained, and we want to give it time and chance to percolate back into the ground. So it gets and we want to create a design that would be attractive and also supportive of that kind of activities, and identify plants that would survive in conditions under which, sometimes it's going to be very wet, but a lot of the times it's going to be very dry. And so we asked for an RFP. We got several responses to this. Tony Endress and his class in restoration ecology got the nod, and they did a wonderful job. He had 2 classes work over 2 semesters on this, and they solved all kinds of interesting real-world problems, and they created a lovely design, but then they didn't have enough money to build it. So you know what they did? They found ways to raise the money. They went into the community. They talked to people. They partnered with Facilities and Services, with the Provost's office, with the city of Urbana. They talked to folks who donated the stones and the plants, and then they built it themselves. And last April, I guess, we dedicated it. So this is it's a lovely example, I think, of tapping into the energy and enthusiasm and creativity of young people, their desire and hunger to learn, and pointing them and making resources available and moving them in the direction of trying to do something that's really going to have a lasting impact, not only on our campus, but in terms of their own expectations. Now, those kids that worked on that, not a single one of them, I would bet, will ever be working in a kind of a 20th century way to create storm sewers without bringing up these new ideas about how to retain water on site, how to create bioswales, how to identify native plants that work well in these kinds of conditions. I'm about to wrap it up here. Let me just tell you of a couple of other things. We did a biodiesel initiative with some folks here at the carpool, where we took vegetable oil waste from the cafeterias and the dormitories and converted that into biodiesel. We had we've got this composting facility up and running now, and we've taken a bunch of the composting waste from the cattle barns and from the sheep barns and from the landscape trimmings from plants and from the vegetable wastes from the dormitories. And we've got a new kind of model composting facility. And we've got so the student and faculty teams got together. They designed that. They organized it all. They found the site for it. They've got the appropriate materials to turn the compost. But in addition, they're taking measurements out of it, because whenever you put waste from a cafeteria into that, it raises the question: is there going to be harmful bacteria in there? Or is there going to be salmonella that grows in there? And then if you disseminate it, is that going to be a problem? So they're taking ongoing measurements of these kinds of issues. So we're looking for ways to really integrate into our curriculum, into our learning activities, both in terms of formal classes and independent studies and graduate student research efforts, ways to face the kind of normal everyday problems that we have in terms of the design and management of our campus into real interesting questions about moving towards sustainability. So let me go back to the big issue, which I said at the beginning, was how are we going to grapple with rising standards of living across the world and this increasing population, that will surely put enormous pressures on the ecosystems that we all depend on. Well, I think one of the ways that we can do that is to work very carefully and very concretely on how we manage and design our campus, how we procure our resources, how we buy our food, what we do with our waste. Turn those into teaching and learning and research opportunities and public engagement opportunities. And that's what I would suggest would be a model citizen, a model university would kind of grapple with sustainability in this way. Thank you, and I'll engage in any questions that you have. David?
I'd like to go back to the question you asked me earlier in terms of the threats on ecosystem services. I really don't see climate change as being the major threat on ecosystem services. It's going to change ecosystem services. It's going to change species. But habitat fragmentation and loss of habitat, you are losing ecosystem services. And I think of the studies done in Chicago's suburbs that show a 4% population growth, but the use of land increased like 34%. So we're using a lot more land per unit of population growth. And the university has some tremendous opportunities, as you know, with the movement of the South Farmington land, to begin looking at integrating sort of the natural environment with the agricultural landscape, with an more urbanized landscape in terms of the campus itself. And that's an area that's much more difficult to attack than some of the more energy savings type of thing. All those are important, but it just seems like for land grant university, there's an opportunity if we can change our perspective to actually really make a significant change in how we look at the land. A lot of this goes back to Eleanor Leopold. A lot of what he said, is more true today than it was then.
Yeah.
Some of the issues that he's raised. So I just throw that out because I think that's a huge challenge. And once you pave over land and remove it, a lot of those ecosystem services are either gone or hugely reduced. And I think we have opportunities in enhancing ecosystem services in this area, but it's going to take some creative thinking to do that.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, sure.
One of the opening definitions, it included things like social, economic, and environmental.
Right.
And in your discussions of your group or with the chancellor and his minions, has anybody thought about how the campus seems to be expanding geographically to the point where it's almost impossible to get the class from one part of campus to another between a class period, and students who come to work out here, they basically can't have a class before their time starts here. And the campus is encouraging, by my estimate, people from God knows where to take other people's money and build big apartment complexes way the heck out there somewhere and attract the students away from campus where our social interactions are going to be diminished. They can't walk or ride a bike. And it seems we're reversing all that. We have our bicycle paths to nowhere.
Yeah, right.
Is there any thought about trying to make campus community a campus community again instead of actively diversifying it out in the countryside?
You know, that's an excellent question, and the answer to that is very complex. Because what's that?
That's why I asked.
Yeah, it's very, very complex because, you know, in a free market capitalist system, if you own some land or you buy some land, and you can persuade the zoning authority to change the land from agriculture to multifamily housing, you can build a university. You can build an apartment complex that will attract university students to it, and we just shoulder the costs of that, both as a locality and then in a larger sense as a society. And a lot of people will vehemently and aggressively defend their right to do exactly that in our.
The campus seems to be encouraging that. When I was here, you couldn't have a car until you were a junior, and the requirements of living indoors a certain amount of time.
Well, that's a good point. I'd like to think more about that because maybe that's another pony I can ride.
These student
Huh. One, take another one. Yeah.
Could you speak to some of the factors that are probably implicated on this campus that kind of hold back the rate of the change pace at which we're trying to reach the goals that we lay out for ourselves? However, those goals are defined and what extent they're defined. And how would one go for addressing those, how would you change those factors to, I mean, you said we are a microcosm of a society, which I'm not sure we really are. If anything, people here should be more educated about the issues. So hopefully we are actually the leading edge of society in many ways, at least we'd like to hope we are. And if we have difficulty in changing or adapting at a much more rapid pace because we see or hear the gong that you talk about, and if our rate of change is not as sufficient or as where we'd like it to be, what does it speak to our future prospects?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. There's this whole emerging line of scholarship on the resistance, the psychological resistance to change associated with kind of threats that are out there. And, the more salient the threat, the less the resistant. But when we're talking about, climate change over a century or half a century, and we're talking about things that are difficult to kind of get your hands on, like we need to reduce, according to the IPCC and others, we need to reduce the amount of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere 20% or 80% below 2000 levels by 2050. It's kind of hard to get your hands around, right? It's kind of hard to figure out exactly what you need to do as an individual to contribute to that. So I think some of that's part of it. Then there's this change of, where habits are hard to break, and you got ways of doing things, and this is how we do things, and we know it, and to figure out how to do something else takes an extra effort. On the other hand, we're starting to see a lot of this stuff be mainstreamed now. Some of the things that were really innovative 5 years ago are just completely mainstreamed now. And part of it is due to the movement in architecture and urban planning and landscape architecture to kind of certify green buildings. So most students coming out now are very interested in making sure they get the training in green building design, and I think in 5 or 10 more years it's going to be hardly any buildings are going to be built, whether or not they get certified or not. They're going to get built with these technologies because they're just going to be so mainstream. Number one, they'll be mainstream. Number two, they'll be the smartest thing to do economically. Unless you're going to build a building and sell it right away, you're going to want to make sure that it has the, these energy efficiency standards in it. Even if you're going to sell it right away, you're probably going to want to be able to say, well, it has these energy efficiency standards in it, right? So.
Bill, when it comes to trying to get information on sustainability, is there a special collection or index or database on campus or in any of the libraries, or should there be one in each library? Just the issue of information on sustainability is very important and difficult, but I don't know what's going on in that area now.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There have been several of us that. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, I'm the WMRC librarian, so.
Good.
As you are probably aware, the environmental collections at the university are spread throughout many of the departmental libraries. I know here the focus of our collection is the environment as it applies to waste and pollution prevention. And I kind of try to keep an eye out for things. And I maintain an environmental news blog that I try to update daily with publications that have come out, or news stories and things like that. But the answer to your question is there's really not one central place to go on campus for that.
That's exactly my sense as well. And we've talked about trying to create kind of a hub where that would happen. And I just need to talk to somebody in information science about that, because I'm not sure if a hub like that adds value or not. Maybe it does. I don't know.
It depends on the librarian you've had to do the outreach. Because the university library right now is a biotechnology librarian who is basically a librarian without a library. What she does is she talks to the faculty who work in the area of biotechnology and she pulls together resources that relate to their research and tries to get that information out to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something like that for environmental science would be incredibly valuable. Unfortunately, there's not as much money in environmental science as there is in biotech. I think
Mhm.
that's why that's kind of stalled for a while.
Yeah. You know, there's an old saying that says, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. And I just love that saying, and I want to end by saying, if you want to take this long walk, I'm very much interested in working together and collaborating in these things, and sharing information, and working on new projects, and tackling kind of the issues that you do so well, not only here on campus, but all throughout the state. And I would welcome the opportunity to work with you. Thank you very much.
Well,